Welcome, everyone. Thanks for having us here. My name is Michelle Dunmarsh. I'm the Executive Director of Photographic Center Northwest in Seattle, and I'm also a book publisher with a company called Minor Matters Books. I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon to guide a conversation with Vivian Goudswain and Nino Rakicevic, who are both with the Sony Artisans of Imagery program. And you're going to be seeing their images here on the screen. Our goal for this is to really have a conversation. How many people have been to Paris, first of all, who are in the audience? All right, so you have a lot of people with some experience here. You're going to gain some interesting and new tips. We are going to take questions throughout, and that's going to be kind of on me to keep an eye out for you. So if you do have a question that you would like to ask either Nino or Vivian or both, please raise your hand and we'll get a mic in your hands, and we'll try and make this as participatory a conversation as we can. In book publishing, there's kind of an old adage that if you do a book about Paris or New York, it's interesting to everyone. If you do a book about Seattle or about Dublin, it's a regional book and it's only interesting in that place. So Paris is one of those locations that I think the world feels like they own Paris. But of course, it is its own very unique culture, old culture, and very unique place. And so I'd love to just start out with maybe Vivian as someone who is very known for your photographs of your hometown of New York. What is different for you? Where do you start when you're thinking about photographing in Paris?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know my work, I shoot New York City mainly. It's one of my main bodies of work, and so when I transitioned into travel photography, Paris was sort of the first city that I went to photograph that wasn't New York. And a lot of my New York imagery is very fantastical and it's very whimsical. And so I was fortunate in that when I was asked to go photograph Paris for the first time, I was asked to photograph it in the style that I normally photograph New York. But I had never been to Paris before, and the only thing I really had to go on was sort of the cinema representations of Paris, Paris in literature. So I had all these very strange ideas of what Paris was, and I think that actually helped me a lot in terms of approaching the city, because I had such bizarre expectations that it kind of helped me get out of the tourist zones and walk around and maybe do something similar to what I do in New York, which is try to find the magical quality of the city outside of the touristy areas and where like locals actually live and experience the city.
I may have killed this. Nino, can you jump in a little bit about some of the legal matters that relate to photographing in Paris?
Paris, yes. Well, first time I went to Paris was 5 years ago, and I'm a photographer, first of all, then I'm also an educator. I teach at Brooks Institute of Photography, and we take our students every summer for 10 weeks to Paris. And to me, I know, as a tourist, like tourists always think about taking pictures of Eiffel Tower, Louvre, Notre Dame. But for me, the most interesting thing about Paris are actually people. Of course, we have to take some tourist photos, and that's normal. But people, to me, that's the most unique thing about Paris. And that's what I do. I always concentrate on that. So first time when I went to Paris, I was also aware of the laws that they have in Paris that are very different than here in America. In Paris, most of Americans, they don't know that the law in Paris, in France, is that you cannot photograph people without asking. You have to ask for permission. But that's the country also. They're also very proud of Bresson, one of the biggest, maybe the biggest name in photojournalism. They're proud of their culture and their photography and photographers, but they have a law like that most Americans are not aware, especially the tourists. So they're constantly taking photos, and they get kind of a snotty looks from Parisians and people there, because they don't understand the laws. The Americans, they don't understand the laws of France.
So speaking specifically about photographing people, which I know both of you do,
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about that process? It's not so easy to walk up to someone
No.
and get permission. I'm guessing that you both speak French. Is that correct?
No.
Un peu.
I have a tips about that too. Yeah.
I actually,
yeah.
I can read French and I can understand it, which obviously helps. My speaking is lagging behind my comprehension. I don't really photograph many people. The people who are in my photos of both New York and Paris tend to be candid. They're just people that I kind of either see, like for example, the street artist here, who is just doing something really amazing in a cool area of Paris, or they just candidly end up in my shots because I wait for specific scenarios to happen, which can be quite daunting sometimes, especially when you're in a city that you're not you don't have a comfort zone in, because obviously I don't live in Paris, so a lot of this is just based on exploration on my own and kind of getting comfortable with certain areas before I started to photograph the street photography where I do capture people in the frame.
I don't speak French at all. I spent 10 months in France. I know some words, okay, but I cannot say I speak. But I also have to say, very common misunderstanding is that French people are rude. I can tell you these, in 10 months there, I never ever experienced that. It's the opposite thing. Americans are actually rude when they go to Paris. And I can tell you why, because as long as you approach French people with some words in French, they'll be nice to you. All you need to do, and this is all I know, parlez-vous anglais? That means, do you speak English? I guarantee you, most of them speak English, and they will speak English to you as long as you approach them in French, okay? So that's the main thing, and I always do that with people on the street, and I never ever had a problem. So they think that you're rude just asking them and assuming that they speak that they speak English. Okay, so that's the main thing.
I think it's a good idea to know please and thank you
Yes.
in every language.
And just
it goes
to
a very
add-
long way.
Just
And
to add
smile.
to that, French culture in general, even I would say Parisian culture is very different from other parts of France, but it's a very polite culture in many ways. So like what Nino is saying, most people always approach each other and say good morning or good evening. So you're either saying bonjour, bonsoir, and a lot of people, it's a culture that really recognizes respect. So if you say thank you, it really goes a long way. And if you just follow those simple kind of rules of etiquette, I find that the people are very friendly.
Very,
I
very,
definitely
very
agree.
friendly.
Definitely
I've
agree.
been studying, especially the first year, I will pull out my map and trying to find where I am, and all. People will come to me and asking, do you need any help? Do you need any help? It happened so many times. And that was my very first impression about Paris, which was completely opposite from what I heard and read. So,
So beginning with Versailles, there's been a long history of photographing Paris at night. And
Yes.
I just want to pick up a little bit, Nino, on what you just said of people coming up to you.
Yes.
But also, Vivian, if you said that you are often alone when you're wandering the streets, and I wonder if you could just speak for a moment. I know that there are a couple of Sony cameras that you like to carry that are larger cameras. How does the choice of equipment change when you are in New York versus in Paris? Do you have different types of cameras that you use, or how is that different?
I would say that because my travel photography is mainly solo, like I'm approached by different clients. And in this case, actually, France is my main client. So I'm very lucky in that regard. But I do travel alone. And as a female who travels alone, I do find that Paris can be a little bit challenging. The crime rate there, it's a little bit different than New York, and I find that when I'm in New York, I have less of an issue carting around maybe some of the slightly bigger mirrorless cameras. And I sort of said that with a sense of amusement because so many of the Sony mirrorless cameras are so tiny at this point. But one of the ones that I carry around a lot is the RX104, which literally fits in the palm of my hand. So if I'm going into the metro where there can be a lot of crime and pickpocketing, I'm able to quickly put that into my zippered pocket of my coat and not be as vulnerable as I would look if I was kind of like lugging around one of the bigger cameras. Maybe I lug around New York without any care in the world, because I'm a lot more comfortable here since I live here. But yeah, it definitely dictates, I think, a different kind of gear for sure.
Does it affect the kinds of cameras that you choose to take? I mean, obviously when you're traveling, there's...
Yes, very much so. Actually, my first year in Paris 5 years ago that's how I got into Sony cameras. I was looking for a small camera that also has to be good but small, because I always carry a camera with me. And I know in Paris, on average, I walk about 10 miles every day while I'm in Paris. And so I want to have a small camera that I can also have like 2 or 3 different lenses with me, because when you walk 10 miles every day, you don't want to carry something big and heavy. So that's how I got my first Sony camera. That was NEX7, and I've been Sony ever since. So that was my main thing. It has to be small. It's also less threatening when you're photographing people, but also has to be good. And Sony cameras are amazing when it comes to low light situation, and I can shoot like really high ISO without any problem. And so that's how actually I got into Sony's, because to me that is the best system out there for that, yes.
So can you both speak a little bit about the subjects that you're drawn to that are specific in Paris? I know, Vivian, you mentioned sort of
Yes.
moving away from tourist environments. Nino, when we spoke on the phone, you
Yes.
had mentioned, of course, everyone goes to Notre Dame, but there are hundreds of incredible churches with amazing architecture. Can you just touch on a few of the places that you maybe are drawn to again and again?
I mean, I think that in Paris is very much like New York, where you have these like really central points of interest that everybody must visit at one point, like the Eiffel Tower or Notre Dame. But the thing I just pointed out is Fontainebleau, the Palace of Fontainebleau, which is, I feel like I've presented about Fontainebleau before, and a lot of people have never heard of it. And it's kind of one of these other palaces where all the kings and all the kings of Paris have lived throughout time, and it kind of flies under the radar of Versailles. And it's just something that I kind of found out about, just looking for other points of interest to go and sort of experience, photograph, and figure out. And I think that it's kind of the same thing I do with New York, which is just trying to walk around. I think Paris is such a walkable city, like Nino says. When I'm there, I walk probably 7 miles a day. Here in New York, I walk like 5 miles a day when I'm doing photography. And so they're similar in that respect, where if you just walk away from a lot of the central points of interest and kind of carry yourself into different areas, you find these really exquisite, magical places. Like this is La Pagode, which is a garden that's the garden of a theater. And it's a place that like a lot of people would never normally associate with Paris, and yet it's so Parisian because it's where a lot of artists go to paint and draw and kind of unwind from Paris life. So yeah, that's been my thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with Vivian. But Fontainebleau is my favorite palace by far, and you're going to see maybe 50 tourists on a busy day, but everybody goes to Versailles. I love Versailles, and when you go to Paris, you have to see Versailles, but there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. What tourists do, as soon as they get to Versailles, they go right into the palace. That's the wrong way to do it, because that's what tourists do. What you should do, go first to the gardens, go straight to Marie Antoinette's village. You're not going to see anybody. And then you work your way up towards the palace, because that's when tourists start going down from a palace. Once when they're done with the palace, they go down to the grounds, then they go to Marie Antoinette's village, and now Marie Antoinette's village, which is most beautiful part of Versailles, it's all filled up with tourists, and you don't want that. So you need to work your way up. We start in Marie Antoinette's village, and then go explore the grounds, rent a bike. It's only 14 euros, but you're gonna see the most with a bike, and then towards the end of the day, go to the palace inside with very few tourists inside. That's my tip, and it works. I learned the hard way. All right. So
So I understand that, and I have used, I am not a photographer, but Sony gave me a great little QX100 that I can attach to my iPhone, and it has very interesting video capabilities. I understand, Vivian, that you do some video, and I just had this image of you on a bicycle with your camera like
yeah.
filming in the front. So
Oh, yeah.
could you speak a little bit about when you're working both in still images and or in video in Paris? And I'm curious, are the laws different related to video than still photography?
no, it's the same. It's the same. Yeah.
I mean, I haven't yet done a lot of video in Paris, to be honest. The only thing that's a little dicey when it comes to Paris and photography is there are a lot of rules about tripods. And so
Yeah.
when you are doing motion photography, like when I do motion photography here, I am very reliant sometimes on tripods, especially video tripods, and it's something that in Paris you have to be really careful about, because even on like streets where you think it wouldn't be an issue, there are a lot of issues and sort of local laws that prevent you from freely using tripods where you would normally think that you can use them. So when it comes to motion, I think that would be a little bit of an issue that you would run into there.
Absolutely right about the tripods. But this tripod doesn't look much, not very threatening, and I have it all the time in Paris, not just in Paris, because we have those laws here also in LA, and no tripod. But something like this, you will be using all the time because it doesn't look much, and even policemen, when they see it, what is that? They don't really think about it as a tripod. But yeah, I guarantee you, you can use these 90% of the time when you need to use a tripod, especially in Paris when they have a lot of bridges. I even have one photo shot from a bridge using this little tripod with a camera on with neutral density filter, long exposure. That's all you need. And buy it here, don't buy it in France because it's going to cost you twice as much. I paid $90 in France for this one, which in that time I could buy for $35 here in the United States. So that's another tip when you go to Paris. Buy stuff here, photo gear.
I think we had a question here.
He was asking why there's laws against tripods. It's just they're very strict about it in terms of like the bureaucracy there.
Yeah.
It's also about safety,
Yes,
mainly
yes.
safety issues,
Yes.
Ways that you could possibly use the tripod for ill will. So they're very protective of their people and of like maintaining a certain order, I would say.
But this is awesome.
If you have any questions about Paris or travel photography, feel free.
How heavy a camera can you use?
I didn't hear it.
How
Oh,
heavy?
You can try it. It's really, really light.
How heavy of a camera can you put?
Oh, I can put any camera. I can put these on it, no problem. This is A7R2. I'll demonstrate it right now.
I think the good thing about mirrorless,
That's
like
it.
I was saying,
That's
is
it.
they're so light that you don't run into
That's it.
issues that you
Yeah.
would have with like the older lines of
That's it.
cameras where they were bigger, heavier. So you can kind of like do things like this that you wouldn't normally be able to do in the past, for sure.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's
the
good.
image stabilization now, it really takes care of a lot of those tripod problems. Unless you want to have really long exposure with neutral density filter, which I always carry with me too. Neutral density filter for if you want to blur out the sky with the clouds, and But I don't use it all the time. But at least I have this little tripod, neutral density filter, and. But I'm hand holding it most of the time. I know I can hand hold like 1/4 of a second with this new image stabilization inside the body. Many times I tried it, no problem at all. So only when I use really, really long exposures, I use this tripod. So.
Can you speak a little bit about how you got started photographing in Paris?
So she wanted to know how I got started photographing in Paris. I attended an event here in New York that just happened to be hosted by the government of France, and I ended up speaking to them about my photography. And I thought it went absolutely nowhere. I never received a magical email from them until like 3 or 4 months later. They asked me to do a commission project in France, in Paris, photographing the city in my style of photography that would then be in a gallery show that they would put on. And I almost had a stroke because I was like, is this real? Is this spam? I don't know. And that kind of began my really nice relationship with them. So since then, that was just early last year, I've been back to France about 8 or 9 times. And I've done a lot of work in Paris for them specifically, and then also throughout France.
So when Vivian said Paris is my client, she was not speaking metaphorically.
No.
Nino, you touched on that you take a number of school groups there through Brooks. Can you
Yes,
speak a
well,
little more
I
about that?
teach at the Brooks Institute of Photography, which is a 3-year program. It's only, we take a group of students, usually about 15 students every summer for like 10 weeks. So basically a little over 2 months. They basically live there. This is not just a trip for 2 weeks, you know, because 2 weeks is not enough. I mean, we want the students to really live there. Because 10 weeks, you get to know people, you make some friendships, you get to know the city, so you don't see only just tourist spots, you have enough to explore the city. So that's how I started going. That was like 5 years ago, and this is going to be our 5th year doing it this summer again. So it's been very, very successful program. But it's only for students at Brooks. It's not a workshop that it's open to everybody. You have to be a Brooks student. So yeah. Sorry.
Paris has such an incredible history, and you had mentioned Cartier-Bresson, but along the lines of visiting things that are off the beaten track, the Magnum offices in Paris, I think, are, though there is a museum of photography in Paris, the Musée de la Photographie, visiting Magnum's offices, for me, was sort of equivalent to visiting a museum of photography.
Oh
so.
yeah, they always have some amazing photo right up front. And you, even if you're not a photographer, when you see that image, you're drawn into it. And I remember first time when I was walking, I knew that Magnum was there, but and I see this amazing, beautiful photo, and I forget, oh, of course, Magnum, it's right there.
So I'm always curious to ask photographers, what is the image that got away? Is there an image that you can think of, or a moment that was so incredible and you were not able to capture it that you continue to seek when you're in Paris? Or an image that you can make over and over and over again and that you continue to be drawn by?
I have to say that because I do work with France, and I don't always get to dictate my own schedule, so very often I have to shoot during the day. Very early in the day and afternoon, and something like every time I go back, I always just want like a large amount of time where I can just wander around at night, like uninhibited, without any issues.
Yeah.
Because to be honest, I really haven't had that luxury yet, even though I've been there so many times at this point. So that's kind of like my, the thing that I'm constantly reaching for with Paris.
You know, it's interesting. I'm actually going to answer this in a completely opposite way. I was just recently looking through some of my photos from 3 years ago, and I was just looking through it, and I saw something that I never seen before, which was it was a crime in progress that I documented in my photos that I never noticed before. I was photographing this old lady, and people were passing by, and I was photographing through people and stuff. And then I kept looking at this sequence of photos. It was like 4 years ago, actually. And I see the guy walking behind this old man, and his hand going into his pocket. The second photo head is already in, and the third photo is already in, like digging stuff. And I'm like, whoa, did I just see what I see? I totally caught that moment, and I'm like, wow, I have to post that now. Like, I just saw it like 3 days ago. I'm going to post it on Facebook. But it's something I'm discovering from like 4 years ago that I photographed. But you have to be careful when you're in Paris. Pickpockets, you have to be aware, especially all these tourist spots. Notre Dame, Eiffel Tower, and those places. That's where pickpocketing gets placed. So.
Are there any references in terms of maybe Vivian in having done some work for the government? Are there any websites or places of reference where people can learn more about the laws regarding photography, or places where you can get permitting in advance of a trip to, if you're visiting and you do want to take a tripod? Or do you have any suggestions for resources for people?
They have a really good website called Atu France, and it's Rendezvous in France. You can look up either one. And they pretty much have all the legal stuff on there, but there's also plenty of contacts on that site that do work within the local governments. And if you have any question about it, they would be more than happy to answer it, I'm sure. So
I Google everything. Everything is out there. I mean, just Google it, it will come up. I mean, that's how I came up with all these things about laws before I went the first time. It's all out there. I'll just Google any question, just tripods in Paris, and you will see. Say, no tripods.
If you are interested in learning more about Vivian or Nino's work, they both have books available. They are not here at the booth, but you can look them up. Are there any last questions before we wrap up relating to our conversation on Paris? All right, thanks very much for being here today.